It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. The ceremony was held in a sprawling estate tucked away in the hills outside Austin, Texas. White roses lined the aisle. A string quartet played softly in the background. Over 180 guests were seated under a silk canopy, sipping champagne and dabbing their eyes. Everyone looked perfect. Everyone except my mother. She stood quietly near the side of the platform, fixing the hem of my dress. Her hands, calloused from years of cleaning hospital floors, moved gently over the lace. She didn't belong in that world, not by their standards. She didn't have a tailored gown or pearls, just a simple blue dress she had altered herself and old black flats with worn soles. Still, she smiled. That soft, familiar smile that meant, "Don't worry, I'm okay." Then Margot walked in. Margot Whitmore, my future mother-in-law, moved like a queen in exile. Every step calculated, every glance a judgment. Her designer dress shimmered in the sun and her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor. She walked straight toward us, wineglass in hand. I stood still, unsure of what was about to happen. She stopped 2 feet from my mother and looked her up and down. Then it happened. With no warning, she raised her hand and slapped my mother across the face. Not hard enough to cause injury, but hard enough to make a sound. Loud enough to make the string quartet stop playing mid-song. Loud enough for every head to turn. My mother gasped but didn't speak. She just touched her cheek and looked at me. The room fell into complete silence. Margot took a long sip from her glass and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "I told you, people like you don't belong in this room. Go back to whatever service closet you came from." I couldn't move. My hands were trembling. From behind me, David, my fiancé, walked up, looking confused at first. Then he smiled. "She's just being theatrical," he said, almost amused. "Mom gets like that when she's nervous. Don't take it personally." And he laughed. He laughed. In that moment, everything inside me shattered. I looked at him, at the man I thought I knew, the man I was about to marry. And then I looked at my mother, still holding her face, still trying to stay strong. She didn't cry. She didn't make a scene. That wasn't who she was. But I saw it in her eyes, the quiet pain, the humbling weight of being humiliated in front of 187 strangers, in a room she never wanted to enter in the first place. And I made a choice. I reached up and took off the veil. The air caught in my throat, but my voice was steady. "We're leaving." David stepped forward. "Rachel, don't. It's just a misunderstanding." I turned to him and said loud and clear, "No. This is clarity." For the first time in months, I see exactly what this is. I turned to the guests, still frozen in their seats. "Thank you all for coming. There won't be a wedding today, but I hope you enjoy the catering." Then I took my mother's hand and walked out, leaving behind roses, music money, and every single person who thought silence was acceptable. Outside, my mother whispered, "You didn't have to do that." But I squeezed her hand and said, "No, Mom, I had to." Because what they didn't know yet was this. I wasn't just walking away from a man. I was walking toward something bigger. And the next time they saw me, it wouldn't be at the altar. It would be across the table where the real power sat. My mother's name is Elena Torres. No middle name, no college degree, no trust fund. But if you knew her story, you'd know why I never needed a father. She came to the United States from Mexico when she was 22, with nothing but a backpack, of visa, and a letter offering her a housekeeping job at Mercy General Hospital. By the time I was born, she had already memorized enough English to get through an interview, fill out a tax form, and teach me the alphabet using a set of crumpled flashcards she made out of recycled cereal boxes. We lived in a one-bedroom apartment behind a laundromat. She took the bus to the hospital every night and cleaned emergency rooms until sunrise. I used to stay awake waiting for her, pretending not to be scared of the sounds outside our window. When she got home, she smelled like bleach and wore tired eyes, but she always kissed me on the forehead before changing out of her scrubs. On weekends, she took on private cleaning jobs, motel rooms, offices, sometimes houses in neighborhoods, where the gates didn't even open unless you had a code. She'd smile at the homeowners even when they ignored her or talked like she wasn't in the room. She never fought back, never complained. She just worked harder. When I turned 10, she made me pinky promise her one thing. No matter what happens, Mija, she said, never let anyone treat you like less. Even if you have to stay quiet, your silence should have dignity. That's your strength. I never forgot that. At 12, I was already obsessed with science. I built model skeletons out of toothpicks, took apart our alarm clock just to see how it ticked, and once scared my mom half to death when I tried to give our goldfish CPR. By 14, I was top of my class. At 16, I got a scholarship to a biomedical research program for high schoolers. My mom cried when I told her. She held the acceptance letter like it was a winning lottery ticket. "You're going to be more than me," she whispered, "but promise me you won't forget who helped you clean the floors on the way there." I promised. We didn't have much money, but I always had books. She'd bring home discarded medical journals from the hospital or buy used textbooks from yard sales. I used to sit on the floor and read next to her while she scrubbed our tiny kitchen, reciting anatomy terms while she wiped down the fridge. She called me Doctora before I even knew what kind of doctor I wanted to be. In college, I studied biomedical engineering. The classes were brutal, the labs were worse, but I kept going. I worked at the campus library, took night shifts at a care home, and sent every spare dollar back to my mom so she wouldn't have to keep working 2 jobs. One winter, she showed up to my apartment with a space heater and a bag of tamales she'd made herself. "You look tired on FaceTime," she said, brushing my hair behind my ear. So I brought warmth. From me. That was Elena Torres. She never asked for praise, never chased approval. She just wanted me to have a better shot than she did. And somehow, with just her hands and her will, she gave me exactly that. She'd spent decades in silence, smiling politely when people dismissed her, bowing her head, when doctors barked at her in corridors, pretending she didn't hear the whispers about illegals and maids. But that slap in front of 187 people broke something in me. Because Elena Torres may have scrubbed vomit off hospital floors, but she also taught me everything I needed to know about honor. That woman deserved to sit in the front row of my wedding and be applauded, not assaulted. She deserved to be respected, not just by me, but by the world. And now I was going to make sure that happened, one way or another. I met David Whitmore in the most unglamorous place possible, a medical tech expo in downtown Dallas. I was there with a borrowed badge and a prototype made of 3D printed parts duct tape and too much hope. My startup at the time, just me, a friend from undergrad, and a few investors who didn't answer emails, had been building a wearable sensor to help elderly patients detect early signs of stroke. We called it Care Pulse. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. I was giving a demo in a corner booth no one cared about, trying to keep my voice steady, when he stopped in front of me. Tall, crisp suit, expensive shoes, conference badge printed in bold letters, David Whitmore, Chief Strategy Officer, Whitmore Health Group. I didn't recognize the name at first. He asked smart questions, listened carefully. Not like the others who gave me the good for you nod and moved on. He stayed for 20 minutes. Then he asked if I wanted to grab coffee after the panel. We sat in the hotel lobby with tiny espressos and paper napkins covered in my sketches. I talked about wearable care devices. He talked about optimizing patient outcomes and digitizing long-term care. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. It wasn't until later that night when I Googled him that I realized who he was. The son of Dr. Margaret Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Health Group, one of the largest privately owned hospital chains in the country. His mother was a former surgeon turned empire builder. His father had died years earlier, and she'd built an empire around her name and her values. By the time we went on our third date, he already knew my mother cleaned floors. I told him before he had to ask. He didn't flinch, just nodded and said, "So she's the toughest woman in Texas, huh?" I liked that. He was charming, funny, smart. He quoted research papers and made fun of my ancient laptop. I liked that he didn't seem like the boardroom types I'd pitched to. He seemed real. The first time he met my mom, she was nervous. She cooked too much food and apologized for her English. David kissed her on the cheek and told her it was the best mole he'd ever had. For a while, I believed it could work. He told me he wanted to invest in CarePulse, not with his family's money, but his own. Said he believed in what I was building, that he wanted to help bring it to hospitals everywhere. And he did help. He introduced me to people, invited me to present at closed-door forums, pushed me to think bigger. At least that's what I thought. But now looking back, I can't help but wonder, Was I always just a success story he could present at conferences, a humble origin tale wrapped in science? Was I ever really more than a symbol? It didn't matter now, because that symbol was about to burn their illusion to the ground. I used to tell myself that Margaret Whitmore was just old school, that she didn't mean anything by the way she paused before saying my name, or how she'd always compliment my poise instead of my work. It was subtle at first. The first dinner at their estate, she greeted me at the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She took my mother's hand like she was picking up a wet sponge and said, "So good to meet you, Elena. You must be so proud. Your daughter speaks so well." Then came the wineglass nod, the quiet signal to the rest of the room that she was tolerating this. The house itself was absurd, 3 floors of glass-polished floors that echoed with every step and elevator no one used, and original oil paintings that probably had their own insurance policies. I had never seen so much white furniture in my life. It was the kind of house where even silence felt expensive. My mother sat perfectly still through dinner. She didn't speak unless spoken to. She picked at her food and smiled politely. When Margaret leaned over and said, "Rachel tells me you used to work in healthcare," my mom gently corrected her. "I cleaned operating rooms." Margaret smiled. "Yes, well, that's very important too. Cleanliness saves lives." David chuckled and tried to change the subject. I sipped water and counted the seconds until dessert. It didn't end there. At a charity gala a few weeks later, I wore a black cocktail dress and my mother's old earrings. Margaret approached with 2 board members in tow. She introduced me as David's fiancé, our brilliant little engineer with a beautiful heart and such a fascinating backstory. Backstory. Like I was a character in some rags to riches fairy tale. Someone she could display but never truly accept. I told myself I was being too sensitive. Until one evening, when we were reviewing hospital data sets in Margaret's home office, she poured herself a glass of white wine and casually said, "You know, Rachel, I admire what you've built. Truly. But if I'm honest, I sometimes worry you'll always be just a little too close to the patients." I blinked. "Close to the patients?" She waved her hand. "Emotionally. Emotion clouds judgment. You come from a very grounded background. That's not a flaw, of course. But in this world, sometimes empathy slows progress." I didn't answer, just stared at the bar cart behind her, wondering how many times she'd said something like that, and no one had pushed back. The closer we got to the wedding, the more those comments multiplied. "She really should hire a professional to do her hair," Margaret said one day watching my mother from across the garden. "Or maybe that's the style in her neighborhood." David would brush it off. "You know how she is. She doesn't mean anything by it." But I did. I meant something by every single time I swallowed my discomfort. Every moment I told myself to focus on the bigger picture. My mother never said a word. She just wore her dignity like armor. Every insult slid off her like raindrops on steel. But I noticed. And the worst part, I stayed. I stayed because I thought I could build a bridge between our worlds. I thought if I worked hard enough, smiled often enough, succeeded big enough, I could make them see her the way I did. I was wrong. There are some people who don't want bridges. They want walls. And soon they were going to see what happens when the woman they underestimated decides to build something else entirely. The morning of the wedding, the sun came up angry. Thunderclouds had threatened all week, but somehow the sky held. Guests arrived early, chauffeured in black cars, dressed in pastels and polished shoes. The estate had been transformed into a wedding dreamscape. White orchids imported from Thailand, candles in floating glass bowls, linen napkins embroidered with our initials. I stood in the bridal suite numb. My dress was satin, fitted elegant custom made by a designer whose name I still can't pronounce. My mother had spent the night steaming it while I slept. She wore her favorite blue dress, the one she'd bought 3 years ago for my graduation. She'd hemmed it herself again and added a pin she found at a thrift store. Her hair was pulled back neatly. Light makeup, nothing flashy. "I don't want to embarrass you," she'd said softly that morning. I turned to her, took her hand. "You never have. Not once." She smiled, but I saw the nerves in her eyes. Margaret hadn't said a word to her since the rehearsal dinner. Not one. I thought naively that the day would pass peacefully, that Margaret would behave for the sake of optics, if not decency, that the tension that had been mounting for months would settle under the weight of ceremony. I was wrong. We were standing just off the main hall when it happened. I was adjusting my veil. My mother crouched slightly, fussing with my shoe strap, trying to keep her hands from shaking. Margaret approached, gliding across the marble floor like she owned gravity. She didn't say hello. She didn't look at me. She looked straight at my mother. "Are you seriously touching that dress?" she said, voice sharp. "Step away, you'll ruin the fabric." My mom stood up slowly. "I'm just—" And then came the slap. A quick, controlled motion. Not wild, not accidental, calculated. The sound echoed off the walls. My mother staggered, slightly stunned. She didn't cry out. She just froze, hand slowly rising to her cheek. Margaret sipped from her champagne flute. "You people never know your place." I couldn't breathe. I turned and scanned the room. Servers froze mid-step. Musicians lowered their instruments. Several guests stared slack-jawed. Some pretended they didn't see. And then David. He walked in from the garden entrance, sunglasses still in hand. "What's going on?" he asked too casually. I opened my mouth, but Margaret spoke first. She was touching Rachel's gown. I had to stop her. David looked at his mother, then at mine. He smirked. "Mom, really?" Then he chuckled. Not loud, but enough. Enough for me to hear. Enough for my mother to hear. And that was it. I took a step back. The veil slid off my head. I picked it up slowly, folded it once, and placed it on a side table. David frowned. "Babe, don't be dramatic. It's a big day." "No," I said, voice clear. "It was supposed to be. Until this moment." Guests began whispering. The air felt thin. "You're upset," he said, coming closer. "We'll talk later." "There won't be a later." I turned toward the crowd. "Thank you all for coming. Unfortunately, there won't be a wedding today. But please enjoy the food. The drinks, they're already paid for." Gasps. One woman clapped a hand to her mouth. A man stood up as if to stop me. David tried again. "Rachel, don't do this, not because of her." I looked at him and said, "This isn't about her anymore. It's about you. You saw what she did. And you laughed." I walked over to my mother. She was still standing quietly, trying not to tremble. "We're leaving," I said. Outside, the sky cracked with distant thunder. As we crossed the gravel path to the car, I heard someone say behind me, "She just threw her life away." But they were wrong. I didn't throw anything away. I took it back. And they hadn't seen anything yet. The diner hadn't changed in 15 years. Still the same cracked vinyl booths, the same humming soda machine in the corner, the same waitress with tired eyes and a patient smile. It sat on the edge of our old neighborhood, wedged between a pawn shop and a car wash. Some places never get remodeled, and that's exactly why they stay real. It was nearly midnight when we got there. We hadn't spoken much in the car. My mother stared out the window the whole ride, holding a tissue she hadn't used. I could feel the weight of everything pressing in around her humiliation, heartbreak history, and I didn't know how to fix any of it. But I could at least bring her home. Not the kind with 4 walls and new tiles, but the kind built from memory. We sat in our usual booth near the back wall, the one with the slightly wobbly table, and the view of the parking lot. The waitress brought us tea without asking. She recognized us. Of course she did. My mom had tipped her $10 once on a $3 bill after I got accepted into college. She never forgot kindness. Neither did we. My mother held the mug in both hands. The tea was too hot to drink, but she needed the warmth. I watched the steam curl up toward her face. She looked smaller than usual. After a long silence, she spoke. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," I said. She looked at me for the first time that night. Really looked. "You had everything. You worked so hard. Why throw it away because of me?" I took a deep breath. "I didn't throw anything away, Mom. I just chose not to build my future on top of someone who would slap you and expect me to smile about it." She said nothing, just nodded once, a tired nod but proud. I looked around the diner. I used to do homework here, legs dangling off the booth seat while Mom finished night shifts. She'd buy me a plate of fries and ask the waitress for extra napkins so I could use the back as scratch paper. We once split a grilled cheese sandwich because payday was still 3 days away. And I never felt poor. Not once. This was where I brought my first scholarship letter. where she patched the heel of her sneaker with duct tape because she didn't want to spend the bus fare on herself. This was the booth where we survived, and now we were back, not because we had fallen, but because we remembered who we were without them. I'll find another path, I told her. Maybe a better one. She reached across the table and touched my hand. You already have. Outside, rain started tapping the windows. The diner lights flickered for a second, then steadied. I looked at her and knew something had shifted not between us but inside me. This wasn't shame. This wasn't loss. This was clarity. They had wealth. We had something they couldn't fake. And they were about to find out just how powerful that really was. I didn't sleep that night. While my mother rested in the guest room of our small apartment, I sat at the kitchen table with an old spiral notebook and a half-dead laptop staring at nothing and everything at once. The events of the day played on loop in my head, her hand across my mother's face. David's chuckle, the silence that followed. I felt angry, yes, but more than that, I felt awake. Awake to the truth I had tried to ignore for months. They never saw me as equal, not David, not his mother. Not the people clapping politely when I pitched CarePulse at their corporate forums. They loved the idea of me, the immigrant's daughter made good, the diversity checkmark, the noble backstory, a success story they could claim like some rare artifact. But the moment my mother crossed their invisible line, the truth slipped out. You people never know your place. I thought about those words all night. By sunrise, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to get revenge. I was going to get everything they thought I didn't deserve, and do it on my terms. I booted up my computer and pulled out the folder labeled CarePulse IP, V2. It held everything design specs, testing data, the most recent iterations of the stroke detection algorithm I'd developed with a small team of researchers. A product we had tried to bring into their hospitals. A project that had been shelved after Margaret's team said it was too niche, not profitable enough. But I knew better. So did another group I had met at a tech conference 6 months ago, Vera Solutions, a rising competitor in the elder care tech space. They had reached out to me about a potential acquisition, but I'd turned them down out of loyalty to David and the hope of integrating with Whitmore Health. Now that loyalty was dead, I emailed Vera's founder at 6:12 a.m. Subject line CarePulse is back on the table. By noon, we were on a video call. 48 hours later, the paperwork was in motion. But that wasn't all. Over the past year, Whitmore Health Group had used data from my pilot programs, data generated by CarePulse during our early trials. I had noticed discrepancies in where that data was being reported and how it was being cited in their materials. At first, I assumed it was accidental, a footnote missed, an oversight, but now I wasn't so sure. I contacted an attorney, one who specialized in IP violations and corporate ethics. We combed through documents together. She found multiple instances where Whitmore had leveraged my research without consent in bids for city funding and Medicare-backed programs. They'd used my name in the paperwork, but never invited me to the meetings. That's when it clicked. They hadn't just humiliated my mother. They had been stealing from me in plain sight, using my innovation to build their empire while calling me a girl from the margins. The next step was a formal complaint filed with the Department of Health and Human Services. We submitted documentation, email trails, internal reports. I knew what would happen next. The city contracts that Margaret bragged about in her interviews, they'd be frozen pending investigation. And while all that was brewing quietly in the background, Vera Solutions went public with the acquisition. The press release dropped on Monday morning. Vera acquires CarePulse in landmark deal, founder Rachel Torres to lead new patient-centered division. I didn't post about it, didn't say a word on LinkedIn, but I knew Margaret would see it, and I knew it would sting. The same week, a local health blog published an expose, The Face of Inclusion, how Whitmore Health courts diversity while silencing it. I hadn't given them the title, but I couldn't have picked a better one myself. They reached out to me for comment. I declined. I didn't want to be part of the story. Not yet. I wanted the facts to speak louder than my pain. By Friday, the hospital board had called an emergency session. Their lawyers were already circling. And from what I heard, David had been quietly removed from several upcoming contracts. I hadn't even spoken to him. Not since the wedding. I didn't need to. Because every headline, every call from a panicked investor, Every funding deal that slipped through their fingers, that was the conversation. That was my reply. And it was just getting started. The fall didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about empires. They don't crumble in a single crash. They rot quietly until someone flips the light on. And that light had just been turned on full beam. By the second week, whispers became headlines. It started with a regional business journal noting irregularities in funding allocations for elder care programs. The article barely mentioned Margaret by name, but anyone who worked in healthcare knew exactly where the finger was pointing. Then came the internal leak, someone from inside Whitmore Health, anonymously tipping off that city grants had been funneled into pilot programs that didn't exist. One of them even bore the name of CarePulse. Except CarePulse had never been approved, never even been invited to present, except for the stolen data. By week 3, subpoenas had been issued. I watched it all unfold from my small office at Vera, where we were busy preparing for a product launch. I was now the head of a department, my name finally on the door, not in the footnotes. David hadn't reached out. Margaret, of course, never would. But I knew they were feeling it. A board member resigned. 2 investors pulled their money and released vague public statements about restructuring their healthcare portfolios. A whistleblower inside the finance department stepped forward, claiming she'd been asked to backdate equipment invoices to cover a $2 million shortfall. But the most poetic blow came from the city itself. The Office of Health Initiatives formally suspended all current contracts, with Whitmore Health Group citing credible allegations of intellectual property misuse and grant fraud. Margaret's face was suddenly nowhere to be found. The same woman who once graced the covers of trade magazines and gave keynote speeches about innovation now dodged reporters outside court buildings and sent her assistant to answer questions at press events. It was surreal and strangely quiet. Not triumphant, not joyful, just quiet, like the kind of silence that settles after a long, endless storm. The one moment that did stir something in me happened on a Tuesday morning. I was sipping coffee, reviewing a spreadsheet of community partnerships when my phone buzzed. Private number. I answered without thinking. There was a pause, then a voice I hadn't heard in months. Rachel. It was David. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, he began. He was right, but I didn't know about the contracts, about what they were doing with your data. I swear. I stayed silent. They kept me out of it. My mom, she ran that side of the business. I wasn't part of those meetings. I didn't know. You laughed, I said simply. He paused. That day he started, you laughed. I said again, slower. When your mother slapped mine, there was no reply. I didn't mean he began, but I cut him off. You didn't have to mean it. You just had to stand there. And you did. The line went quiet. I lost everything, he finally said, voice cracking. No, I said calmly. You lost the illusion of control. The rest was never really yours. I miss you, he said quietly. I could hear him breathing on the other end. I imagined him in some boardroom corner alone now, without the backing of headlines or family funds, without the power to charm his way out. I miss who we were, he added. That version of us never existed, I replied. You just didn't notice until the lights came on. I hung up, and that was the last time I heard his voice. Whitmore Health Group officially announced a leadership restructuring the following week. Margaret stepped down. Her name was quietly removed from the company website. Several board members were replaced, and while they tried to frame it as moving toward a more inclusive future, the truth sat heavy in every paragraph of every press release. They had underestimated the wrong woman, and now they were paying the price. But even as I watched the walls collapse around them, I didn't feel like I'd won something. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like justice. Not just for me, for my mother, for every woman who's ever been told she's too small to matter, too poor to sit at the table, too close to the patients to lead. We weren't too close. We were exactly where change starts. And the Whitmores had finally learned that the hard way. It was a Thursday afternoon when he showed up. I was in the middle of prepping a pitch deck for a citywide care initiative when the front desk buzzed my office. You've got a visitor, the receptionist said. I barely looked up. Name? He won't say, but he says it's personal. I didn't need to guess. "Let him in," I said. A few moments later, David Whitmore stood in my doorway. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His suit was wrinkled, his tie missing. The perfect polish he once wore like a second skin was gone. All that remained was the man underneath, unsteady, unsure. "Rachel," he said. I stood, not to greet him, just to make sure he didn't take the chair across from me without asking. "I know I said everything I needed to," he started, "but please, just hear me out." I said nothing. "I didn't come to argue," he added, "or to ask for anything." Still, his eyes were scanning the room, the walls, the photos, the corner awards I hadn't even hung up properly yet. "You really did it," he said. "You built something. I always did," I said. "You just didn't see it." He looked down. "I made a mistake." "No," I said. "You made many. Laughing at my mother was just the one you can't erase. I didn't know she would. But you didn't stop her." He flinched. The silence between us stretched thin and cutting. After everything fell apart, he said, "I kept thinking about the night we met. That girl with the duct tape prototype and $10 shoes. I admired you so much." "Admiration doesn't matter," I said. "Not if you only show it when it's easy. You stood beside me in public, but behind me in private." He exhaled, defeated. "You were the real thing, Rachel. You still are." I crossed my arms. "Then why did you need me to become your family's mascot? Why did your mother feel entitled to hit mine, and why did you smile like it was some inside joke?" "I didn't know who I was without them," he admitted. I believed him, but I didn't pity him. "I do now," I said. "And that's the difference." He looked at me with something like grief. "I lost you." I nodded. "Yes. But it wasn't sudden, it was slow. Every silence, every dinner where you let them talk down to her. Every time you told me, it's just their way. That's when you lost me." He stood still, hands at his sides, like a man who had finally run out of arguments. "I'm not angry anymore," I told him. "Just clear. Is there anything I can do?" he asked. I shook my head. "Go be better. But not here. Not with me." He took a slow breath, then turned to leave. But just before the door closed, I added one last thing. "You didn't lose a wife, David. You lost the chance to grow." He paused, didn't turn back, and walked out. And just like that, the final tie was cut. The chapter closed. The room felt bigger after he left. Not because I was alone, but because I was finally full of my own voice, my story, on my own terms. 2 months later, the city held a ceremony. Not a glamorous one. No red carpet, no orchestra. Just a folded table under a canvas tent in a public park that had once been an empty lot. I stood beside my mother, who wore a new dress, simple navy blue with sleeves she insisted on tailoring herself. Her hair was pulled back, her lipstick subtle. The mayor handed me a plaque. It read, "For outstanding contributions to public health innovation and community dignity." I held it up, smiled for the cameras, and then walked to the podium. There weren't many people, maybe 70, a few city council members, a handful of local health workers, some students from a nearby high school who'd helped paint a mural on the new care center wall. But my voice didn't shake. My mother never went to college. I began. She didn't speak fluent English until she was almost 30. She's never owned a house. She worked the night shift, the early shift, the shift no one wanted. I paused. But she gave me everything that mattered: discipline, resilience, and an understanding that hard work isn't something to hide. It's a form of love. I looked at her then. She didn't cry. She never did. She taught me that silence doesn't mean weakness, and dignity isn't something you buy, it's something you carry. A breeze rustled the papers on the table. I gripped the podium. When I was younger, I used to dream of building something big, something lasting. I thought success would look like boardrooms and business cards. But now I know success looks like a neighborhood where elders feel seen, where nurses are heard, where no one is just a story for someone else's speech. I nodded once. And so with that, I'm proud to announce the creation of the Elena Torres Foundation. Applause followed, modest but sincere. We'll offer scholarships to daughters of working-class mothers, training for immigrant women in healthcare support fields, and a program that connects retired caregivers with families who need them most. My mom looked away then. I think it was the only moment she came close to crying. Later that night, we returned to the same diner. The waitress brought us tea and a slice of lemon pie on the house. My mother sat in our usual booth, her purse on the seat beside her hands, folded around a steaming mug. "You didn't have to name it after me," she said, half a smile tugging at her mouth. "I know I said. That's exactly why I did." She shook her head. "You didn't need revenge, Mija. You could have let it go." "It wasn't revenge," I said quietly. "It was a reminder. A reminder of what? That we don't have to shrink to fit inside their version of success. That we can build our own." She nodded slowly. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out something wrapped in old tissue paper. It was a photograph, faded, bent at the corners. She placed it on the table. It showed her at 23 standing outside Mercy General Hospital, wearing her first uniform and a badge with her misspelled name. Her eyes were wide, her hair pulled back the same way. "I wanted you to have this," she said, "so you don't forget where it started." I stared at the picture for a long time. "I never could," I whispered. Outside, headlights passed. The city hummed unbothered. But in that moment at that table, I felt something shift inside me. Not a triumph, not even peace, but a kind of rootedness. A knowing that I didn't need their name. I had hers, and that would always be enough.